Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Where the Dark Corners Are. Hello. I am Vina, and I am your Dark Travels hostess. Tonight, we're going to crack open our paranormal passport and head to not necessarily the land of Down Under, but more Middle Earth. If you're familiar with the very popular movie trilogy, Lord of the Rings, this is where the most beautiful background was filmed. I am speaking of the country, New Zealand. And to help us learn more about the paranormal hotspots in Auckland, New Zealand, joining me today from the Paranormal New Zealand investigation team is Mark Wallbank. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hello. What a great introduction.
Right?
Awesome.
I haven't done this before or anything like that. So you are currently sitting in New Zealand, correct?
That's right.
And I understand that you have been running around Auckland and doing a lot of investigations. You created this investigation research team back in 1984. Is that correct?
It was an early version, yes. It was myself and three friends, and we started this paranormal sort of research team back around 1984. And there was just three of us. There were four at one point, but there was mostly just three. And we would sort of go around the old farmhouses and derelict buildings that were in our area. We lived in an early sort of area that was being developed. So there was a lot of farmland. So we spent a lot of time just sort of roaming around the old houses and barns and the derelict burnt out shells of houses and just seeing what we could do. And we decided we had one camera and we had one audio recorder, and that's pretty much all we had.
So a camera in 1984, was that pretty heavy?
No, it was just a basic snappy camera, which
okay.
You had the roll of film with 24 shots, and you had a cube flash.
Okay. I envisioned a different camera, right? So
I'm not that old.
Right. No. So your research team investigates ghosts and cryptids and UFOs and urban legends. So that's your focus. Now, what would you say was like the catalyst of you getting involved in researching the paranormal?
Well, I mean, I've always been interested. I've always had an attraction to the odd or the unusual or the unexplained. And the only books I wasn't really good at reading and all that kind of thing, but the books I did read very well were the non-fiction books that were based around ghosts and UFOs and monsters and that kind of thing. I was interested in those things, so I read a lot about those things. So they helped me through my education just by encouraging my reading. And I had many questions. My teachers at school didn't really have any answers to the questions I had. And, of course, the more I read, the more questions I had, and the more I wanted to find out. And my teachers couldn't help me. They had no idea. So the only information I had was books. So I read lots of books about the unexplained and monsters and UFOs. And so I started spending time just looking into it for myself, just seeing what I could find and just going to old places that I thought might be haunted and just having a look. It wasn't until I used to watch the cartoons, as we all did as kids. We'd watch the after-school cartoons, and one of my favorites was Scooby-Doo. So I watched Scooby-Doo, and I always thought that it was great that a bunch of people would go out searching for these mysteries and hunting them down and looking for answers. And I always thought that was pretty cool, but I didn't realize that it was actually a thing and that people were actually doing it. I was just out there doing it by myself, not thinking that it was something that other people were doing. And it wasn't until I read a book. I found a book in a second-hand store over here when I must have been 10 or 12 years old, and it was by Harry Price. and it was Confessions of a Ghost Hunter.
Now, just so people understand, Harry Price was considered to be like the world champion in the paranormal research. He was a British gentleman who just paved the path, basically.
He was an early pioneer in the field. Yeah, it's very divided what people thought of him. Because he was a magician and all that, a lot of people think that he was up to trickery and lies and fakery, but he also did a lot of good in debunking fakers and hoaxes himself. So he did a lot of good. So I have a lot of respect for him. And I read his book many times as a kid, and it was a big inspiration. So it was nice to know that there was somebody out there actually researching it. But I still, at that age, didn't know that there were actual people that actually went out and sat in these places.
Investigation.
Yeah, and actually did the field research. I just thought people researched them as in writing books and writing about it. It wasn't until I saw Ghostbusters, the scene at the beginning when they're in the library and they're walking around with gadgets, and that's when I started to think, this is great. This is what I want to do. I want to be in a haunted location. I want to have gadgets. I want to be looking for these ghosts. I want to see what it's all about. The moment in Ghostbusters where they all get freaked out and they're all running down the stairs of the town hall, or the library, they're all running down, the absolute look of fear in Dan Aykroyd's face, that was my spark.
Right, that was your moment.
That.
Okay.
I wanted to experience that. I was like, hell yeah, I want to experience that for myself. I want to experience that fear. And that was the spark that got me going to getting out there and just investigating places by myself. And then I started forming a team, of course. I did it for about good 20 years. I had the first version of the team I had for just about 3 years. Then I went solo for about 20 years, or maybe more. And then around 2009, kind of thought, this was around when Ghost Hunters, the TV program, came out. And I quite liked that. I quite liked the idea of a team going out again. And so I sort of got a bit more inspired to sort of get a team together for myself. So I started piecing people together, and we have a team now, and we've been going for well over a decade in that version. And yeah, still going strong and doing very well.
So in Auckland, which is, I'm assuming, is where you guys do most of your investigations, obviously. If people were looking to check out paranormal hotspots, say, for example, they're coming to New Zealand and they kind of want to have some sort of paranormal experience or potential, what would you say are the top 5 hotspots, again, in Auckland?
We don't really have ghost tours here like you guys do over there. So we don't have tours as such. I mean, we do a few public events, and a couple of other groups do events from time to time, but it's not a regular thing. But there are many locations that you can actually visit. You can visit them. There's various theatres and art centres and that kind of thing, various haunted bookshops and cinemas and lots of landmarks like bridges, the Auckland Harbour Bridge, things like that have stories attached to them. So there are places you can visit that are open to the public, and they won't cost you anything.
So you mentioned bookshops. Is there a special bookshop, or? There
was one called the Hard to Find Bookshop. It's now moved. It's relocated from the old building it was in, but it's still around. But it has relocated now. So apparently that new location isn't haunted. But there are places like that did exist.
Okay. Now that kind of actually brings me to a topic of haunted objects. When I was researching your guys' website, because they do have a website, it's called Paranormal New Zealand, you had like an article, if you will, regarding haunted objects, where you kind of debated whether or not you weren't necessarily a believer, but you weren't ready to say, I'm a non-believer either. So what's the story behind the scenario regarding the haunted objects?
That's something I've always been fascinated in. I haven't experienced anything myself, but back in the 80s when I had the first team, I had a few items given to me by various families that wanted to get rid of them. So I sort of held on to those through the years, and in following years I've been given many other items. So I have a whole room in this house that's just full of just various objects that are sort of ritual
almost
objects.
Like a Warren home?
Pretty much.
Okay.
But smaller. but a bit smaller.
Okay.
And you can't walk into it. It's too cramped. There's boxes everywhere. And I need to display it somehow. I don't know.
Okay.
But I've got cameras in there, and it's monitored 24/7. And I've had this room for a long time, and I haven't really experienced anything. So I do it purely out of interest and research, and I hope that one day something will happen. but it hasn't yet that I've noticed.
Okay.
But I do like the idea. I do like the concept of it all.
Okay. So you had mentioned bridges and bookstores. Where would you say is like, if you had to say one definite paranormal, hands down, totally haunted spot in all of Auckland, your top one, where would you say?
And all over the whole country, we have so many iconic, reportedly haunted locations. But all the times I've been to those locations, nothing's happened. So as a team, we haven't really experienced anything within those iconic locations around the place. It's been the more unassuming ones that aren't really known, that the stories really just come from the staff that work there or own the place. So they aren't widely known. So there are a lot of locations that we have got that we've built up reputations and relationships with that give us regular access to them. Places like the Lake House Art Centre, that's a place that it's on the North Shore here in Auckland, and we go there all the time. We've experienced so much. It's been really enjoyable going there, and we will stay the night. We'll quite happily just spend the night. I live not too far from it, so I can just pop down there and spend a night if I want to, just sleeping on the floor or on a couch. It's really good. It's very handy, and we've experienced lots there.
So what's haunting the Lake House?
Well, the Lake House is an old big villa that was moved from its original location. It used to be on the side of a beach. We don't know why it was called the Lake House, but it was on the side of a beach on a coastline. It was moved to this big reserve, a big sort of open reserve area, and it just sits there. And now it's an art school for kids and artists. And there we've had many stories coming from that. We heard that a young girl had been seen running up and down the stairs or up on the top mezzanine floor. And all the activity that we've been getting so far seems to point towards it being a young person. We've had short shadows, just the short sort of child-sized shadows. We've had the sounds of running footsteps, like bare feet on wooden floorboards running down the hallway, almost like a child is running to hide. We've had trigger objects being triggered in answer to questions. And most of the answers that we've been getting, if they're in fact answers, we don't know, they're sort of responses, I guess. But if they're correct, well, then all the answers pointed towards it being a young girl, about 5 years old. We even went through the alphabet and tried to work out her name, and we came up with Patty or Patricia. So we've been calling her Patty. Whether that's her name or not, we don't know. But we just find it interesting that all these little signs and that we've been getting that point to it being a child also coincide with what other people have been seeing as well. Also reports in that lake house of a couple of girls that were doing some arts and crafts in one of the rooms there, and they ran out screaming because they said that there was an old lady, an old hag-type lady, and she was up in the ceiling in the corner like a spider, right, looking down at her. And so they ran out screaming, and they were just too terrified to go back. And stories like that, you know. So, of course, I had to spend a night in that room.
Right, to get to see
by myself.
Right.
Yeah, but, you know, and we've had a lot of activity as well, which has been nice. We've been able to record some of it as well, which is nice. It's always a bonus when you can record it.
Right, get physical proof of potentially what's going on. So,
potentially, yeah.
Right, potentially.
There was also a school, an old girls' school, central Auckland, and that had closed down. It was just old and derelict and not being used. And we managed to get the lease on that one for 2 years. And so we had the key. And so we would go there. Over 2 years, we carried out about 25 research visits. And we were staying the night and spending many, many hours and late nights there, and experienced a lot of activity. And it's all those places that nobody ever hears about.
So off the beat
found those
places.
to be the most active. Yeah, just ones that aren't really widely known and just sort of in-house. Only the staff really know about the stories.
So who's haunting the old schoolhouse?
Oh, we experienced lots at the schoolhouse. It's a two-level building. It's quite big, and there's a lot of rooms. We experienced during our sessions, we had, footsteps. We did one session where we were doing an EVP, a communication session down the bottom of the stairwell. There's a big, massive grand staircase. We were sitting down the bottom. Upstairs, the door was locked, but we clearly hear the door open and bang above us, and then you hear footsteps coming down the stairs towards us. There was about a good 5 steps, and you could hear the floorboards creaking under the weight of something. And we were just sitting there looking up, waiting for something to come down.
Right.
And it was just incredible. We've also had sort of communication sessions where we were doing live feeds, a Facebook live feed, and we would have a phone on a tripod set up in the old toilets. There's a big sort of toilet area there, and we experienced quite a bit in there. And people on the live feed would be claiming that they're hearing the sounds of children laughing and giggling and cheering and like it's a playground. And this is at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so we couldn't hear it, but I would go upstairs and spend some time in that room with headphones on, listening to the live feed, and I could hear it. So it was almost like audio was being transmitted directly to the live feed electronically somehow. So that was kind of a changing point for us to know that perhaps EVPs can be transmitted through electronic devices.
Okay, so
which we thought was interesting.
Right. They say humans can't hear all the noises that are being made because we're on a certain frequency, and a lot of other noises are coming through different frequencies. So aside from ghosts, you guys, like I previously mentioned, you guys investigate urban legends. And kind of poking through your guys' website, I noticed you guys have a goat man as an urban legend. What's the goat man?
That's one that goes way back, and it's near a military base installation there. And so we can't get access to that because it's high security, but there's a big desert road that kind of goes past it and leads up to it as well. And it's called the Old Desert Road, and it's in Wairau. And we've heard so many stories from people that work at the installation there and people that have been in the area that have seen this giant upright goat-type figure with horns and just everything that you can imagine a goat man being. He wears an overcoat as well, a big overcoat. Some of the stories are where they've picked up this unusual guy who in an overcoat as a hitchhiker, and then suddenly he just disappears. He disappears from the back seat. Just weird stories like that a lot of people are experiencing in a very isolated area.
So, I don't know about in New Zealand, but in America, a lot of people with goats, and if they're standing upright, that's not a goat. That's like Satan. That's no bueno, as we say here in America. So, Okay, so that's the goat man. Now, what's the story with the three witches?
Okay, that's another one that goes way back to about the 80s, I think. It's in one of the Auckland Domain, which is where the Auckland Museum is. There is a small area which has a giant fountain, and there is a big statue there. There's a sculpture of three figures, and they're standing. One's holding a bowl of fruit, and the other's sort of holding a trumpet. And it's meant to be the three muses. That's what it was built as. And it was created by an artist with a positive sort of story behind it, and it was to encourage hope and positivity and all that. But just through the years in that area of the domain, there are a lot of very old trees, and those trees are well over 150 years old, maybe older than that. And a lot of people have gone to that area, and when the moon is right and it's a full moon and the area is dead quiet, it looks like there are people hanging from the trees. People have also been attacked by something that jumps out of them with red eyes. They've heard evil cackling and laughing, something in the bushes, and it's all completely dark. There's no street lights there. It's a very dark area. So you've only got the moonlight. So there's a lot of people that have made claims of something scaring them in that area. So it's thought that these are the three witches.
Does New Zealand have a history of hanging witches? Do you guys really have that history?
We kind of do. It's not really widely known. There were a few people hung, of course. I think the last person to be hung was I'm not sure when it was. I can't remember the date. Sorry, but we have had hangings here, of course. Witches, I'm not too sure about. It's very undecided about that. Some people say yes, some people say no. Undecided, but so a lot of this is possibly just urban myth. But people are making claims. People are coming forward and saying this happened to them. So we just don't know if there's anything to it or whether it's some sort of creature that's seen. People are experiencing something.
Right. So let's talk about another potential urban legend. There's a particular camp where a teacher supposedly killed 3 kids. What's the story behind that?
Camp Adair. Again, I don't know all the detail on that one. It's very vague, and it's very hard to find the actual detail and the truth about it. So I don't know. There was a teacher apparently that did kill. I say apparently because that's what I've heard. I don't have the facts, but apparently there was a teacher that did murder 1 or 2 people many years ago. We're talking back in the 70s or 80s, I think. And so there is this kind of rumor. There are the rumors around about that story, and whether they've been sort of exaggerated through the years, we don't know. But the whole area it has a very dark history. And even though it's a camp that was set up as a confidence builder for kids, schools will take the kids there at least once in their time. We all go to Camp Adira. I went there as a kid. We all went there in our classes, and it's an amazing place. But it does have a dark backstory when you start digging.
So what's the dark backstory?
Well, I mean, apparently bodies buried in the forest, surrounding forest. Apparently, again, no proof. But there are stories, and that's what we go for. That's what we research. We research the stories. There's meant to be evil sort of spectres that sort of roam the halls. There's meant to be people that have been attacked by something that growls at them in the forest. Things like that. So there is something, again, going on out there. Whether it's fueled by the urban myths, we don't know. But it's fascinating either way, though.
Right. Now, you mentioned your investigations with your research team. What kinds of equipment would you recommend for people starting out to get started in their own investigations? What kind of equipment would you say this is definitely something you're going to want?
We've tried every piece of equipment that's available. We do try, but we've found that the majority of the equipment that's out there at the moment is just a waste of time and doesn't do what the creators will say it does. So we've experimented them. We feel like we have to buy these gadgets first to trial them and experiment with them to see firsthand. We're not going to put down gadgets that we haven't used. It seems a bit pointless. So we do try everything from spirit boxes to everything, all the various different sort of REM pods and all the gadgets that are out there. We'll try them. We'll give them a go. But so far, we haven't found anything that has given us anything but the usual sort of pareidolia or misinterpretation or anything that's up to interpretation and can have many different other explanations for it being set off. We try and just not use them because there are many other reasons why that gadget will be set off. And if we're lucky and privileged to get into a location, the last thing we want to do is waste our time messing around with a gadget which is possibly giving us false positives. So we kind of just work with what we've got and what we know works. And for me personally, my favorite piece of equipment is a video camera. I have quite a few video cameras and I film all angles because that way you get the audio and you get the visual. You get to film the team in action. You get to film where everybody is in the room. You get multiple different angles, various cameras set up on tripods. So to me, that makes sense. It's documenting things that you can see and hear, physical things, and anything outside that is usually up to interpretation, really.
Now, what about thermal cameras? Do you guys utilize those?
Yeah, we've got a couple of different thermal cameras, and we've found that they do have their spot. I think they are valid in what they do, but they are again open to interpretation and false positives, like with reflections, and any shiny surface will show a heat signature of a person or the person filming.
Okay, like a reflection, basically.
Yeah. A wall even a wall will have, if it's got a slightly shiny surface, show a figure.
Okay.
So,
well, I mean, these are good to know because people who aren't experienced using these types of equipment wouldn't know, and they think, oh my God, that was just a ghost, and in reality, it's really their reflection off of a shiny wall. So
yeah, I think anybody new to this though that wants to sort of check out different gadgets, I mean, I just say research it. Just research these various gadgets and the reviews. Read what other people are saying about them, and don't just read one website or one book. Read a few different websites and what people are saying about them, and you'll start to just try and figure it out for yourself and try and find a balance. Because I mean, there are a lot of gadgets that I've used that I think are possibly no good, but somebody else might use it and find a lot of good in them and what they do. They might find that they actually work really well with them. I also believe that with gadgets, sometimes it's good to experiment with them outside of what they were created for. We've used EMF meters as trigger objects for communication, and something seems to be happening there. Something seems to be able to trigger them off, almost an answer to questions. So whether that's a valid thing, we don't know, but it's an interesting thing and it's worth experimenting with because we don't know. We don't know what's triggering it. We don't know what's happening there. So it's all part of the research.
Right. Like K2 meters, you mean?
Yeah, that sort of thing, yeah.
So, I mean, I actually have one of those, and I would say I feel really comfortable using that, but that's kind of something that I use and have used on my very rare and very novice investigations. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of equipment and I don't do it very often, but when I do, that's my little friend, my
You
little
just
gray
work with
friend.
what works for you. I mean, if it
Correct.
works for you and it's giving results, then go with it.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think there's any point in spending a lot of money. I think it's something that you should build on. Start with the basics. I would suggest you have a camera. You've got camera on your phone. You've got an audio recorder on your phone. You've got all sorts of gadgets on your phone. So that's a good starting point. If you have a phone, then you've already got a few gadgets right there.
Right. A couple of apps to boot.
Yeah.
Now, I understand you've investigated outside New Zealand as well.
Yes.
My understanding is you've been to England once or twice?
I've been to the UK a few times and Australia as well. It's and Hawaii and places like that, Las Vegas. And we've sort of been around. I've travelled around. I do like to travel with my wife, and we sort of head overseas as often as we can. We fell in love with the UK. We fell in love with Scotland. We love Scotland, so we head back as often as we can. Very expensive, but we do it because we love it. And I just spend my time, we usually go for a few weeks, and I travel around meeting up with other teams and spending the nights in various haunted locations and just meeting people and doing a few talks here and there and just hanging out with friends and having a fun time.
I've covered a couple of hot spots in the UK, primarily England and Scotland. And I understand you've been to the Greyfriars Bobby. Is that correct?
The Greyfriars, yeah, that's a great cemetery, yeah.
And it's my understanding there's a poltergeist, the Mackenzie poltergeist?
Yeah, the Mackenzie, yeah. That one there is actually a myth. That was started by a tour guide,
Okay.
a ghost tour team. They started that, and there's a lot of division there where, they started the story as to sort of attract people.
To reel them in? Okay.
Pretty much. I believed it until I heard the real story. But that place is just incredible as it is. Without the poltergeist story, it's still amazing to know that there are thousands of bodies buried under the ground, not even in graves. They're just buried under the ground, and they're buried upright. There are thousands of them.
Really? Now, are we talking about
up.
Mary's clothes? Like the underground...
Greyfriars, yeah.
Right. You know, a lot of times when I do my research, Scotland, especially Edinburgh, you just have your pick. It's like down the street, pub, ghost, ghost story here, ghost story there. They're all in the basement. They're all in the cellar. It's just,
I know.
And it makes a lot of sense if you know the history of Edinburgh. It's just been a lot of deaths. They did have a series of witch hunts. They have a little plaque memorial for the witches that were unfortunately burned on the hill in the city. I can't recall the name of the hill, but they do acknowledge that this horrific scenario happened, especially in this particular spot. And in fact, in Edinburgh in August, they have a lot of celebrations. So, that's obviously the best time to go. But definitely Edinburgh is like, that fingers crossed is my next foreign city to visit. But my understanding is you also been to Chillingham Castle. Is that correct?
I spent a night at Chillingham, yep. I heard the story, so I had to go. Again, it was a very quiet night.
Okay.
Nothing to report, but no, it was quite interesting because just spending time in the dungeons and the lower areas of the castle. It's very interesting. I wouldn't say nothing happened, but it was a very odd feeling down there. You can actually feel quite odd vibes in certain areas. And I've heard a lot of stories coming from that place, and I find it really intriguing. It's one that I would like to go back and spend more time at, more in depth with my research, and actually just spend a few nights by myself, just immersed in it. I think it's one of those locations that you need to keep coming back to. You need to spend more time to really get the full effect. It's the same with the Ancient Ram. The Ancient Ram is a place that's over 1,000 years old, and I've spent a few times there now. And I've experienced a few things, but it's just such a fascinating place because it's just so old.
Rory, in fact, that was a full episode of our podcast because it was just like, this room has all these issues, and then this room has all these other issues, and then there's this shadow in the hallway and dead bodies on the floor, and you're just like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Right.
Great, love it.
So now with all of these experiences and investigations, you have put together a couple of books. Is that correct?
I have just released my 4th book.
Okay. Which one is that one? Are we talking Haunted Auckland?
Haunted Auckland, because recently, at the end of last year, we used to be called Haunted Auckland, because when we started off way back in 2009, we didn't think we would become as known or as big and acknowledged as we have been, and figured that we would be a bunch of people walking around the Auckland area, just around our hometown, and we would just explore some of the places around our hometown. We didn't sort of figure into it that we'd be known throughout the whole country, and that we'd be traveling the whole country, that we'd be traveling overseas and all that. It didn't really dawn on us, and so we kind of outgrew the Haunted Auckland team name. So we wanted to call ourselves something that better described who we are and what we did and the area that we covered. So we changed our name recently to Paranormal New Zealand, which is the name of the website. The website has been running the website's been going since about 2010, I think. And so we decided to change it to Paranormal New Zealand instead. It covered more area and better described what we do. So the book that came out recently is called Haunted Auckland, and that pretty much has over 90 plus stories and locations from all over Auckland, just our hometown. And I decided to call it Haunted Auckland because, in sort of tribute to the early team name, like an end of an era, I guess. So we wanted to change. And so, yeah, Haunted Auckland, the book, came out a few weeks ago now. And it's doing quite well. It's better than I thought, actually. It's been quite popular.
So if people were coming to Auckland and wanted to know about paranormal hotspots, then this is definitely the book that they would want to pick up, especially since you're relaying actual experiences. This is not, I read from a book, these are the ghost stories. It seems like these were our experiences. This is what we're going to discuss and vouch for these particular spots. Now, the other really cool book that I see that you have out is Haunted New Zealand Road Trip. And so that's pretty, in my opinion, New Zealand is not a big country by comparison to the United States. So, a road trip is not unfathomable. So if people wanted to check out Middle Earth, okay, let's be honest, the gorgeous scenery there, then the road trip book would probably be idealistic.
I think so, yeah. It covers the whole country from top to bottom, both islands, because we have a North and South Island. So the book covers pretty much both islands.
Right. And that's one thing to be aware of, is that it does consist of 2 islands. So that's something to consider when you're making travel plans. Now, you have 2 other books, Voices in the Wall and Talking to Shadows. Which of these 2 were your first?
Voices in the Walls was the first attempt at writing. I still don't consider myself a writer, even after 4 books. It's just something I wanted to do because I was inspired. There was a guy from Wellington, a paranormal friend of mine who has a team in Wellington, the capital, and he had a book out called Spooked, and it was basically exploring the paranormal in New Zealand. And I read that, and I just loved it. I just thought it was a great book. He's a great guy, and we've investigated many times together. And I just found it such a great inspiration to me personally. And we had all these folders full of investigation files and case notes and journals and all these details that we've been writing down through the years of all our investigations. And we thought it's a shame to not let people read these or see them. We've just stored them away in a room and nobody gets to read them. So I figured I would put out a book. So that was Voices in the Walls, and that was the beginning of sort of our Haunted Auckland series. We did 2 books. There was Voices in the Walls and Talking to Shadows were the first 2. And then I got snapped up by a publisher who had read those first 2 books and wanted to do a book with me. And so we did the Haunted New Zealand Road Trip. That was great fun to put together. That was, I got to travel the country and write little reviews. And it was almost like a travel guide, but it had my personal experiences, my personal thoughts about how bad the food was or what I ate and how bad the plumbing was in places.
But that is essential to know, just so everyone understands. Plumbing is essential, and food is essential. And if it's bad food, you need good plumbing. So, these are important things. So, but yes.
If you're spending a lot of money to stay in a hotel, you want a bit of quality there.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, it kind of reads as a sort of diary, journal, travel guide in parts. Yeah. And same with Haunted Auckland. This is my Haunted Auckland book. It's kind of a travel guide as well, but it's a little bit different from other travel guides. It has personal stories there, and it has notes and bits from pieces from my journals and my own files. One thing I don't want to do is I don't want to be putting out information that isn't my information and isn't anything that I've been able to verify or,
confirm, right?
Confirm for myself. So I always tell people, whenever I do a talk, I always tell people that I'm not going to stand here in front of you and tell you that ghosts do or don't exist. I expect them to go look for yourself. And that all the information that I do give people, whether it be in a book or in a talk, is all stuff that I've been able to verify or confirm for myself. I don't just sort of rattle off information that I've read online or, because if I don't know it's fact, I'm not going to put it out there as fact. So I just give my own personal take on it, and I let people make of it what they will. And it's the same with my books. They're kind of me telling a story, and I pretty much write the way I speak. I'm not an academic, so I don't try and sound like an academic. And I just let people read it and take what they want out of the books and out of my talks. And if I can teach somebody something, that's great. If I can get somebody interested in the paranormal field, well, that's fantastic. Yeah.
And for reference purposes, all of these books can be found on Amazon. Is that correct?
Yes, they can.
And Amazon United States?
Yes.
Okay, not just New Zealand, I mean. Because we do
actually... Last time I checked, they were all there.
Okay. We do actually have a significant of international listeners. You mentioned you love the UK. Well, we do have a lot of British. We have some Spanish listeners from Spain. So, I mean, it's actually quite interesting. And I'm very, very grateful that we have this variety of listeners all over the world. So, if someone was interested in your book in a different part of the world, having access would be exceptional for them, I think.
Oh, with social media has just completely opened up the field, hasn't it? I found it fascinating going through the stats for our website, for example, and just finding out which countries people are watching from. And it's incredible just seeing how many people are interested in New Zealand.
Right.
And from all over the world.
Right.
It's even these little places that I'll probably never go to myself. People over there are watching us.
Correct.
It's incredible.
And, yes, and so I'm like, where is this in Scotland? Where is this in Sweden? I never even heard of this place. So it has been very interesting when we look at all the information that we can see in terms of who's listening, who's checking out the website. And, for the podcast, the downloads and what have you. So it's been very eye-opening for me personally in the journey of this podcast. So, and then I can imagine, I mean, I don't necessarily operate a website, so it must be more as exciting for your guys' website there. So, but yes, so I personally think I'm going to check out the road trip one, simply because there's just so many wonderful places. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you mentioned, there's the iconic places that doesn't really seem to be as potentially haunted as the lesser known places, the ones that people kind of keep hush-hush about. We are fairly...
Well, you have to say that the places that we've had the most activity are the places that aren't really listed on any top 10 lists or anywhere. They're not really known for being haunted. And so we're the only ones that have actually ever been there and investigated it. And those are the places that we have the most activity.
And it seems to be more not only eventful, but fun.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, I want to thank you very, very much for joining me tomorrow, tonight, with all of your wonderful experiences and recommendations. And even you said, New Zealand, no one knew. And it's like, well, yes. And that's one of the beauty about reaching out and meeting people from these areas. Then people get to know. You understand. Yeah. So,
yeah.
But thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm going to move on to business. Facebook. We have a Facebook page, and if you are curious and or interested and would like to join, send us a request. But in the meantime, if you have a place or a topic or a country that you would like us to explore further, send us a request at wherethedarkcornersareat@gmail.com. So until next time, please remember, only the few can find the beauty in the darkness, which is why we hope to meet you where the dark corners are.